Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out 5 ways British and American road trips are very different.
Hello, my wife and I
Lawrence.
recently got back from a visit to West Virginia, and on that trip it got me thinking, how do road trips compare between my homeland of Britain and the United States? And with America being the land of car culture and Britain that of public transit, Americans might be thinking, is a British road trip even a thing? And yes, it is, but in my experience of doing road trips in both countries, it's a very different thing. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but one other journey that I've been on recently is the long march to 1 million subscribers.
Wow.
If you've done that, thank you. If you haven't, do that now.
Am I subscribed? I think I'm subscribed. Y'all be sure to go to Lost in the Pond and like and subscribe. See, I'm subscribed. I'm going to like this video too, even though I've not watched it. Hey, also maybe go check out my other reaction channel. It's called JJLA Reacts Music, where I react to music. Well, hey, something I think he's gonna say is the distance or the time, because how long does it take to drive across Britain? Show me on a map. What if we went from, we'll say, way down here. What's this? From, this? Porguara Beach? I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Sorry. Comment below about how I should pronounce it. Let's drive up to, gosh, what's this? Duncansby Head Lighthouse. From, I already forgot the name of the place we were coming from. Porguara Beach. How long would it take to drive? 16 hours and 13 minutes. So you could drive it in a day. That's a long day. That's a long drive. 16 hours and 13 minutes. Okay. How far is it from London to Liverpool? That's a 4-hour drive. Wow, big difference. How long would it take me to drive from New York City to Los Angeles? I've driven from Orlando to New York and from Atlanta to Los Angeles in 42 hours. Okay. 16 hours versus 42 hours. I think that's the main difference in a road trip in the two countries, I would think. Right?
In the meantime, here are 5 ways that British and American road trips are very different. Now, you can't really compare and contrast road trips in the United States with road trips in Britain without talking about the distance involved. So when we drove from Chicago to West Virginia, it was something like 400 miles. And if you were to take that distance as a percentage of the distance from the East Coast to the West Coast, it's not that much. However, if you were to do the same thing in Britain, you would end up in the sea. The point is, everyone knows at this point, America much larger than Britain. But what happens with that is that once you move to the United States, even having grown up in Britain, your perspective of distance changes. You see, it used to be that when I was a kid, we'd drive from Grimsby, my hometown, down to the southwest coast, and it took a few hours. We thought that was an eternity, because in British terms, that is. Remember, we're a country that's the size of Wyoming. But what struck me on this road trip recently is that I didn't really consider it that long at all. I mean, granted, I am now in my 40s, so my lower back felt it, but my brain didn't. You know, it was as if this was a normal thing to do. Of course, while I'm on the road, I get the peace of mind knowing that my name and address are far from the clutches of data brokers. You've probably heard me talk about them before. Data brokers are those entities that...
He snuck an ad in there, Lawrence. What's this an ad for? Incogni. Y'all be sure to go to Incogni and buy whatever they're selling. Don't though.
Of course, there's one thing that I think probably helps Americans get used to the idea of driving a bit further than we might in Britain, and that's the size of our vehicles. I may have mentioned it before, but not only is the country much bigger than the United Kingdom, but so are the cars. Not for us, we have a Prius. But you will see on American roads plenty of either trucks, which is great for transporting stuff, or those minivans. Now, that's not to say that we don't have either of those two things in Britain. They're just not as widely embraced as they are here. I've experienced this. I've travelled, again, again to West Virginia years ago in a minivan because we had multiple people coming with us. And honestly, it was hell now that I think about it, because there were too many people. We'd overestimated the space. But I could see a situation in where the minivan would be great. I'd have the whole 3 back seats to myself, and then everybody else has to squeeze together in front of me. Because that's just who I like my personal space. America gives me that, just not in a Prius. In Britain, we're all about smaller vehicles. I think when I was a kid, we had a Fiat Uno, tiny hatchback, and I remember we drove fairly long distances in that. Of course, I was a child. I did silly things like, lift my legs up onto the seat, or put them across my brother, or in my mum's face. And I was smaller, so it was easier. I mean, this is doing a disservice to our larger vehicles, but the point is, pound for pound, you don't have quite as much space in British cars. So it's a good job we don't drive as far.
Interesting. Yeah. One time I visited my aunt and uncle in Philadelphia, and we drove down to Washington, D.C. in his Rabbit. How far is that? It's only a 3-hour drive. Yo, it felt a lot farther than that. The Volkswagen Rabbit, this little car, similar to Lawrence's Fiat, for 3 hours. It's a long time to be in there. Anyway,
but another thing that helps put into perspective the long distances that we may or may not be travelling is how we pass the time. I've noticed that it is a common feature of road tripping in either country to play a game. It's just that the game in question may well differ. Take, for example, road trip bingo. Played in both countries, this is where passengers whip out a bingo card and check off the things they see. Whoever completes their card first wins. However, it's become clear that the items on a US bingo card don't always match those on a British one. And that's because the scenery and the things that occupy it differ somewhat on either side of the pond. For example, the UK's sheep population is around 7 times greater than that of the US, meaning it's literally impossible to have a road trip in the UK without seeing them a lot.
Yeah, I can't remember ever seeing a sheep on a road trip. Lots of cows, though, and horses. Mostly cows.
Then again, unless you're driving through the 4 states that have banned it, the same thing might be true in the US when it comes to billboards. I became aware of a game growing up called Spotto, and this is where you basically look out for a yellow car, and then the person who sees it says, Spotto. But after I moved to the US and I was driving around with my wife, she brought to my attention something I'd never heard of called pediddle. And believe it or not, that's not something that you do at a rest stop. This is another game. You and others are on the lookout for a car whose headlight is out. And when you see that, you're supposed to say pediddle and hit the roof, apparently, in order to determine who it was who said it first.
I never played that game, but we played Punch Buggy. Whenever you see a Volkswagen, you scream out Punch Buggy and you hit your brother in the shoulder. Punch him hard. We played that a lot.
And another pastime specific to the US is the license plate game. This is where passengers observe traffic for the license plates of different states, the ultimate goal being to tally up plates from all 50 states. No equivalent for this exists in the UK, where rear license plates, regardless of region, are plain old yellow. Spotto. That said, we do have a different number plate game, in which we might look out for number plates containing, say, a certain letter or number. But the biggest thing that I've noticed is that Americans are far more likely to break out into song. I thought this was a trope of the films because it happens in National Lampoon's Vacation and many others, until I got into a car with my wife's family. Take me home to the place. In Britain, I'm not saying we don't ever do that, but I think most of us are probably a bit self-conscious about the way we sing, and so that doesn't happen as often. And if it does, we'd have to be drunk, and if we're drunk, we shouldn't be using a motor vehicle. What I'm saying is we reserve the singing for weddings.
Oh.
Now.
Yeah, we'll do a bit of singing in the car. Music was a big part of all of it. Yeah. The radio was always on, now that I think of it. Lots of music. Anyway, stretching.
Now, it's one thing that Google Maps will tell me, ooh, look, it's 9 hours to travel from here to there. But what that doesn't take into account is the fact that you're going to have to stop a lot, especially since we have a dog with us. So along the way, we got out at what Americans know as rest stops. And a lot of the time, rest stops in the United States are sort of small buildings that usually house some bathrooms, as well as pamphlets displaying places to go in the local area.
Snack
Occasionally,
machines.
of course, you do find those larger rest stops stops that have a full-on food court and things like that. They exist
Not
as well.
often.
In Britain,
That's
there are
kinda
one or
rare.
two major differences when it comes to these outlets. Firstly, they're not called rest stops. They're known as motorway service areas. And these are usually the big kind of rest stops. You have your food courts, you have your toilets. You also have a lot more parking space. Partly that's going to be down to the fact that even though we're about the size of Wyoming, we have nearly twice the population of California. And this might also account for the fact that your parking spot within this car park is usually timed. But it's also down to the fact that ample space is afforded to trucks, often known as lorries in Britain. It should be noted that the US concept of truck stops, in other words, stops used exclusively by trucks, are not nearly as common in the UK. The other thing to note here is that at British rest stops, there's usually a hotel attached to it in case you need to stay there overnight. You don't typically find this at American rest stops because most towns or cities have a complex of hotels somewhere in its vicinity.
I've heard that UK rest stops are a lot nicer than American ones. Although I have also heard that America has bigger truck stop places like Buc-ee's. It's like a giant warehouse, but it's a truck stop. There's showers you can rent. Don't really stop at rest areas that much, unless I really gotta pee.
Britain also has hotels, the likes of Travelodge and Premier Inn. And I'm not going to spend this time boring you with the differences between British and American hotels because I did that in a previous video. What I am going to say is that there's a cheaper alternative in the United States that a lot of road trippers capitalize on, and that alternative is motels. Motels did originate in the United States as a portmanteau of motor hotels, and they are bog standard. About the term I would use for every motel that I've ever stayed in. There's no swimming pool, there's no jacuzzi or hot tub or anything like that. It's basically just a room, and then you've got the manager's office. It's like in Psycho. We've all seen the Bates Motel.
Right.
Most motels feel like that. I've never been murdered, as proven by the fact that I'm still doing this video, but I have felt like there's somebody in the room with me, and it's usually my wife, and everything's fine. From the British side of things, I have two things to say here. Firstly, because we don't travel such great distances, there might be an argument that we don't really need to stop off anywhere en route to where we're actually ending up. So a lot of the time we don't end up making that sort of overnight stay in the middle of our journey. But if we were to do it, in my experience, we used to just check into one of those Premier Inn hotels or a travel lodge. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's normal among all Brits who travel, or if it's just another indication that my family is really middle class.
Speaking of motels, I live in Los Angeles, and there's actually a few motel-like places that charge by the hour, and they advertise that they have adult movies available. And this neighborhood is also where the guy who wrote the movie Pretty Woman got the inspiration to write Pretty Woman, if you know what I'm saying. So there are a lot of ladies of the night who will spend an hour or two with you, which has created a whole industry of by the hour motels, if you know what I'm saying. And one of them has a swimming pool. Gross.
Anyway, let me know in the comments if you've been on a road trip in Britain and America and what your observations were. In the meantime, I'm going to go and read about what to do in West Virginia, even though I am now home. While I'm doing that, here's a video I did back in the day about the hotel differences between Britain and America. You'll watch that next. Until next time, goodbye. Hello.
Goodbye, Lawrence. Y'all be sure to go to Lost in the Pond and like and subscribe. West Virginia has good skiing and good coal mines. Yeah, when I go to Britain, I think I'm going to fly into Manchester and then do a clockwise loop around Britain. I'm excited that the drive times are going to be so short. So it's like, we only drove for 2 hours and we're in a whole other place. Whereas I could drive for 2 hours and not be out of Los Angeles. You know what I mean? Cool. I'm excited about it. Well, I predicted the one thing, the distances, but not the vehicles, not the time, not the rest stops, not the hotels. Well, y'all, I'd like to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time. Later.